Let's learn to recognize the early signs of tension in your horse. It's super important to be able to recognize the subtle signs that your horse gives when they have a lot of tension. What does a horse with tension look like? A horse with a lot of tension is a horse that's living with a lot of anxiousness, fear, anxiety. They're always on the edge. Any little thing can trigger a spook or a negative reaction. I feel like a lot of people relate to this feeling because we're all kind of living on the edge of our seats every single day with nerves and anxiety, and there'll just be some little thing that'll trigger us to just have a meltdown. And it's super frustrating. Somebody from the outside may just think that we're crazy because why would that make us cry? But they don't know what's going on up here because there's a lot of things going on upstairs that nobody else hears. And obviously you can't communicate vocally to your horse, so there are a lot of things going on in their head that you can't understand, and so you have to allow room for error. So your horse might seem perfectly fine because you're not reading the indicators of their tension, but then all of a sudden a rabbit can jump out of the woods and cause your horse to have a huge reaction. You definitely didn't see that coming. It came as a huge surprise, and you were very hurt by that reaction of your horse because you felt it was personal to you. It's a very human thing to do, to take things personally from animals that are definitely not having the same intentions that we do. So let's go over some of the physical appearances of tension. I'd like to think that most people can recognize other people's body language and should be able to tell when they're sad or anxious, have anxiety, so on. It's probably not most people, but I would like to think that it is. Sometimes people can give off very loud body language, like when your girlfriend is giving you the cold shoulder, and that's very easy to read body language. Other times, it's subtle body language that your girlfriend gives you that you ignore that creates the cold shoulder in the first place. But horses are kind of similar, where they have some very loud body language cues, but other pretty subtle cues. So let's go over the very basic physical appearances of tension in a horse. This is going to help us recognize when a horse has tension, nerves, anxiety, and we'll be able to diffuse the situation before we lose control of it. Signs of tension. If you can't bend your horse's ear easily, if their ear is stiff and unable to bend, that means they have tension. Or if you can't wiggle their ear easily back and forth, it means they have tension. If their lip is curled up into a knot and sucked up into their mouth, they have tension. You want their lip to be loosey-goosey, and their top lip for that matter. Both loosey-goosey lips. Flared nostrils is a sign of tension. If their mouth is dry, it's a sign of tension. Their jaw being clenched is a sign of tension. You can see their muscles protruding out of their jaw, and they have tension. If your horse's tail is tight and clamped under themselves, then they have tension. You want to be able to pick up their tail nicely and easily and have it all loosey-goosey and be able to swing it around and not have it tight, because that is better. Obviously, there's a long list of reasons why you don't want your horse to have tension. Some of those reasons are because they're easily spooked, triggered, and can have bad reactions. They're not really present, so they're not aware of you. Their mind is elsewhere. They hold a lot of tension in their body, so their muscles become very sore and tense after a while, which also makes your saddle not fit as well. Also, if they're holding a lot of tension in their body, it makes it very difficult to get collection with them, and then if you ride them a lot with improper collection, then they build very poor top lines and develop poor muscling in their body. They're usually buddy sour. They don't like going out on their own. If they do, they spook a lot, or it's very hard to keep them in an even gait. They don't like to just walk. Either they have to not walk at all, or they have to run, or they do a lot of swerving, so it's very hard to walk them in a straight line because they're constantly weaving back and forth. So obviously we want to fix these issues because, well, for one, they're bad for your horse's health and their muscling and structure. And obviously it's dangerous to you because if the horse reaches their last straw, that might be your last straw too. So it's very important to be able to recognize these signs and be able to help de-escalate your horse's tension and to be able to help them regulate their nerves so they can become a happier, healthier horse that is safe for you to be around. Also, if we don't recognize these signs and we ignore them and we keep shoving them in a box, that's going to create a shutdown horse. So what is a shutdown horse? Usually a shutdown horse is your typical dead broke horse that has been flooded and sacked out and no longer tries to communicate with you because they've been forced into submission and told to shut up. So they no longer try to communicate with you because their way of communicating sometimes looks like bad manners to people. A lot of people think that the horse just has to realize that whatever they're doing to them is not going to hurt them, so they have to force it on them and not let the horse get away so the horse can realize that it's not hurting them. But that's just putting the horse into freeze mode, which is forcing them into shutdown. So kind of bringing us back to a horse with tension. A horse with tension is just communicating their fears with us. They're communicating that they're uncomfortable, they're communicating that they can't handle anymore. And a shutdown horse is like a horse with tension, but 3 stages worse because they've been silenced. So they are no longer allowed to express their fear and concern with their person, and they have to be silent. A shutdown horse is a horse that has learned to internalize their feelings, has stopped caring, stopped trying to communicate with their person, and it almost looks like depression from the outside. A shutdown horse is well behaved because they're cowboy proofed, but they've kind of become robotic and business-like. They're not interested in engaging with you. They've lost all curiosity. They're kind of dull. Like, they'll do what you ask, but they're kind of dull when you're asking them. They just feel very disconnected. Like their brain has just shut off and they're now in auto drive. But because these horses have learned to not communicate with you, they have unpredictable freakouts that take you by surprise. So basically, a shutdown horse is basically a horse that is well behaved, but they have lost all enthusiasm. They've lost all their curiosity. They're not interested in engaging with you. They're dull to respond. They're stiff and rigid. Or they'll give you little signs like walking away from you when you go to get into the pasture, or boxing you out when you go to put their halter on. Like you go to the side to put their halter on and they'll kind of turn their head to block you out. These are very, very subtle signs of communication, but they are communicating with you, and a lot of times they're ignored, and that's why the horse is shut down. I actually have first-hand experience with a shutdown horse. She was my first real horse that was actually mine, and I was only 13, and she was a dead broke kid's horse that ponied really well behind other horses in a trail ride. Obviously, she was really well behaved, knew her job, was very safe, but she was very shut down, which meant that she had no interest in me and she didn't want to engage with me at all. She was all business. If she didn't have a halter on her, she wanted nothing to do with me. And if I had the halter on her, it was, let's get this over with. Now, before we got her, I had already learned how to ride on my sister's Icelandic horse, Lena, who we still have, and our paint horse, who was a very slow, safe mare to learn on. And the way that my family liked to ride was we would just throw a halter on them and we would ride them bareback, and we'd run some, we'd walk some, we'd play games in the pasture. We kind of just have fun. The horses were curious. We all just enjoyed ourselves. But our way of riding kind of freaked Starlight out because there was no horse that she could basically just sleepwalk behind like she liked to do. She actually had to think, and it seemed like she had never ran on a trail ride before, which is not really surprising. But she was also super buddy sour, which was also not very surprising. But Starlight, being my first horse, was kind of challenging for me because even though she was this bomb-proof kid horse, the way that we rode, like my sister would run off on the trail in front of me and Starlight would freak out and want to bolt after her to keep up with her with all of these nerves because she had never ran on a trail before and she was not confident in me and not confident in herself at all. It was like she had to wake up and think, and it was terrifying for her. So it took me a long time to be able to work through this, and it was very frustrating, and there was a lot of trail rides where I was just spinning her in circles because if I let her go straight, she would start running, and it was kind of scary because it was not a controlled run at all. But I also didn't want my sister to just not run because it was our way of riding, and I wanted to be able to work on this and work through it. So even though she was a dead broke, safe kid's horse, put her in a situation that she was not dead broke in and shut down in, she had no idea what she was supposed to do. She was terrified, had so much anxiety. She was a horse with a ton of tension that had just buried it. And it took me a long time to be able to get her to engage with me. She was very businessy. She didn't even like to be scratched. Like I tried to find her itchy spots and she just didn't want anything to do with me. So it took a long time to be able to get her out of her shut down shell. But plot twist, she's actually Stella's mom. And she actually went blind in her older age, which was very hard to go through. But her going blind made her have to rely on me more, and she actually became like a puppy dog where she would follow me around everywhere. I would just let her graze through the yard wherever she wanted to. She would just follow me around like a puppy dog because I was the only safe place for her, because the other horses kind of freaked her out because they would be out in the pasture with wire fences. She wouldn't be able to see those, and it freaked her out every time the horse would leave her. So I was her safe place. That was actually quite bittersweet, and it was so cute how she would nicker for me and follow me everywhere. And because she was so shut down when I first got her, her being that puppy dog-like and following me around and wanting to engage with me, she loved being scratched and stuff, was just heart-melting. So some ways you can help your horse break out of their shutdown shell is to really pay attention to their very subtle body language, because they are not loud with their body language anymore because they've been shut down. So you really have to pay attention to the very, very subtle things that they try to tell you. Some of those things can be like boxing you out, like I said, or if you go to pet their head, if they raise their head up or turn their head away from you a little bit, just back away. Just acknowledge that you see that they're communicating with you, because that in itself is a huge breakthrough for the horse to be able to recognize that you recognize their feelings. So I want to go over one of my favorite ways to help your horse release their tension. I've shared this before and I've talked about it quite a bit, but I want to go through it with a little bit more depth and why it helps release tension in your horse. So like I said earlier, obviously when your horse has tension, their body is going to have a lot of tension. They're going to be very tight and restricted in their movements, which is going to be very hard for them to have collection and develop a very nice top line. So this will hopefully help all of those issues. So a good way to diffuse tension is to help them stretch, because when you stretch, you have to learn how to breathe more consistently and deeper, and it helps you just to release all of those tensions and nerves and anxieties. But like always, if your horse is in a very stressful environment and already kind of over the top, it's not a good place to teach them something new. So when you start training this, just make sure you're somewhere where you know your horse is somewhat comfortable. So the first place you want to stretch that will help your horse have to breathe deeper and more consistently is the rib cage. And when your horse is tense and tight and have a lot of nerves, their rib cage is very stuck in one place. There's no bending it or stretching it, and that's why it's so hard to get them to bend for collection and develop a nice top line, because the rib cage is very stuck. So doing the crab walk or getting them in a bend is basically just helping them bend their rib cage and learn how to hold themselves in a more collected, stretched manner that helps them develop a better top line. And once we learn it on the ground, it's going to be a lot easier for us and them to be able to do it on their back. So what this is going to look like is we're going to stand right at their shoulder. We're going to put our hand up kind of behind their ear at their neck, and we're going to apply pressure towards their flank. And here's what we want to look for. We want their back leg that's closest to us, their inside back leg, to stretch in and across. So you want their back inside leg to step in and across themselves, so it'll be reaching towards their front outside leg. You also want their top line to be a nice even bend. You don't want there to be any rigid edges, if you know what I mean, through their body. So you don't want there to be a point from their shoulder to their neck or their neck to their head where there's a visible bend where it's just bending at that point and not through their whole body. You want the bend to be consistent through their whole body. And then obviously you want their front legs to be doing the same thing that their back legs are doing. You don't want their front outside leg to just reach in front of themselves so that their shoulder is falling out. You want them to reach across themselves because they're in a bend. You want their whole body and their legs to be pulling themselves into a bend. And obviously this is going to take some time and practice to get your horse to be able to understand what you want and to be able to achieve the full bend in their body. But we're gonna start very, very slowly so that they understand what we're asking them and we're not creating any confusion, and we're only going to work in the right direction. We're trying to diffuse tension, so we don't wanna create any more by confusing them with our asks. So we have to be very clear and we have to be very quick when we release. So if we put pressure on the rein and we get an ear twitch towards us or an eye looking at us, that means we're getting an answer that we want. Obviously, I've done this a lot with Stella, so she already knows what I'm trying to ask her. We're already getting a lick and chew, which is something you look for, is a lick and chew. That's going to be a very good indicator that they're releasing stress. It's going to be a lot to look for, so we're really just going to try to look for something that we think is good and just release when we think we see something good, because it's very difficult to be like, was that an actual bend? Was that a good reach over? Was that good enough? The answer should always be yes, that was good enough, because we want the horses to keep giving us answers and we don't want to just have to keep telling them what to do. We want them to give us stuff. I'm standing next to her shoulder. I got my hand up. I got good collection on the rein, so she's gonna feel this. When I put pressure on this, I'm just gonna lift it up. Then I'm gonna swing the end of my rope at her flank to get her to move forward. Right now she's a little bit distracted, so I gotta use a little bit more pressure. Now she knows how to do this, so I'm gonna ask for more. I'm looking at that back inside leg. I want that to go in and across, forward, across, forward. Good, like that. So let's try that again. I'm at her shoulder, got my hand up, got collection on the lead. I'm gonna put pressure at her flank. I'm gonna keep asking her until she goes forward. Good. I'm being a little bit picky here because I know she knows this. Good, very good. And it's also hard to tell when you're the one doing it when they can actually get to a bend. So usually when I go back and I watch these videos over while I'm bending her or something, I'm like, she was actually bending more than I thought she was. So sometimes you have to assume that your horse is bending more than you think they are. So just give them lots of grace. So that's one of my favorite exercises I like to teach our horses. It's easy and slow. You don't have to be chasing the horse everywhere and get sweaty and gross and create lots of drama. You can just do it nice and calmly and get really cool results from it. So I highly recommend that you start practicing that with your horse. And I just want to quickly mention the obvious signs that your horse is releasing tension and coming to relaxation. And some of those things are licking and chewing, very important, yawning, snorting, sighing, cocking a back leg. Also, pay attention to your horse in the pasture, because if your horse doesn't lie down a lot, it's very, very important that your horse lies down and gets REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement sleep. And it's very important that your horse gets that, because if they don't, then they're kind of drunk on lack of sleep, and that can wire them out and make them do unpredictable things like bolt and have big reactions because they're kind of strung out. They're kind of drunk on no sleep. And some of the reasons why they won't get that kind of sleep is if they have a lot of tension and a lot of nerves. If they're shut down or just anxious, then they won't feel comfortable enough to be able to sleep in their own pasture. So helping them break through their tension and their nerves and breaking out of their shut down state is going to help them and you tremendously for your training and their health. So yes. But that's it for this video, guys. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, give a big like and subscribe. I post new videos every single Sunday. You can go follow me on Instagram and TikTok, and I'll see you guys next week Sunday. Okay, bye.